Hey everyone, this is Pallavi, and today I am going to show you the first game of the book called Chess: The Art of Logical Thinking by Neil MacDonald. This game was played between Karpov and Korchnoi during the World Championship in 1978 in Baguio city. The opening played in this game was Ruy Lopez. Let's start. So I started with e4 center control and making way for the bishop and the queen, and also controlling the d5 and f5 square. e5. White's powerful opening move motivates black to replicate it. Black also controlling half of the center and controlling these two squares, making way for his bishop and his queen. Now white played knight to f3, developing towards the center and also attacking the pawn on e5. Knight c6. Black efficiently protects the e5 pawn by developing the queen's knight, maintaining equal development. This proves superior to f6, which not only lacks development but also weakens the king side. Or queen e7, trapping the king's bishop and burdening the queen with a laborious defensive role. So after knight c6, white played bishop to b5, but continues his straightforward approach to development. He clears the way for castling and puts pressure on the knight, which defends the e5 pawn. a6. Black takes time out from developing to attack the white bishop. This is known as Morphy's defense after the brilliant American player Paul Morphy, who was the best player in the world in the 1850s. So after a6, now white played bishop a4. Instead of bishop a4, let's say if white plays bishop takes c6, then d takes c6, knight takes e5. White's attacking momentum would fade, as black can reclaim the pawn with queen d4. Then knight f3, queen takes e4 check, causing white to lose the ability to castle after either king f1 or queen e2, queen takes e2, king takes e2. Thus white chooses to retreat the bishop, maintaining the possibility of bishop takes c6 as a long-term threat. Black's move a6 proves beneficial, offering the additional b5 if the pressure on c6 intensifies. So after bishop a4, now black played knight f6. Black brings out his other knight with an attack on e4 pawn. Castle. Instead of defending the e-pawn, white moves like knight c3 or d3. White finds it more appealing to keep possibilities open by castling immediately. After all, any plan he decides on would involve kingside castling, while the queenside development can be adjusted based on black's next move. Although castling leaves the e4 pawn unprotected, white's pressure along the e file and against c6 ensures that he will likely regain the pawn eventually. After knight castle, black played knight takes e4. The open variation of the Ruy Lopez. Black has no intention of holding on to the pawn, but instead hopes to gain activity for his minor pieces by getting rid of the pawn that controls d5 and f5 squares. White played d4, the correct way for white to increase his initiative. There is no rush to regain the pawn. Instead, he would have given up his strong attacking light squared bishop for no good reason after rook e1, knight c5, bishop takes c6, t takes c6, rook takes e5 check, and bishop e7. So white instead played d4, b5. Black decides it is the right moment to block white's idea of capturing the c6 knight, as snatching another pawn in his undeveloped state would be risky. As e takes d4, rook e1, d5, knight takes d4, and white has the double threat of knight takes c6 and f3, winning material in either case. So instead black played b5, bishop to b3. The bishop has to retreat, but it now has a good view of f7, the weakest square in black's position. Black played d5. Black returns the pawn in order to shut out the white bishop, support the knight on e4, open the diagonal for the queen's bishop. White played d takes e5. White regains his pawn and can be pleased at having emerged from the opening with a little space advantage. The pawn on e5 can be used as the spearhead of a kingside for a kingside attack. Bishop e6, developing the bishop while supporting the attacked d-pawn. Knight b d2. White develops and challenges the black knight, which is sitting on an excellent central square. A horrible mistake would be knight c3, as after knight takes c3, b takes c3, the pawns on white's queen side are inactive and the bishop on b3 is currently immobilized with no available moves. So white played knight b d2. Black played knight c5. Black could have continued developing bishop to c5 but preferred not to have his pawns broken up in the unclear variation knight takes e4, d takes e4, bishop takes e6, f takes e6, knight g5. Therefore, the knight retreats and keeps the tension in the center. Knight to c5. White played c3. White competes for control of the d4 square and prepares to reposition the bishop to c2 for an advantageous open diagonal. Now let's assess the outcome of the opening phase. Classical chess principles recommend developing minor pieces swiftly, castling within the first 5 or so moves, moving a piece only once during the opening. So far, the world champion has demonstrated an exemplary display of classical chess. White's play has been direct and forceful, with each move either developing a piece, opening new attacking lines, or exerting pressure on the opponent's defenses. White quickly castled and only moved one piece twice, the bishop, when it was under attack on move number 3. On the other hand, Korchnoi has brought out 3 of his minor pieces and deviated from rapid development only to recapture the e4 pawn and create some discomfort for the white bishop. Nonetheless, there are no complaints about this approach so far. So after here, bishop to pawn to c3, now black played g6. This move, however, reflects a more dynamic approach to chess. In a King's Indian style, black prepares bishop to g7 to attack the e5 pawn, which is a commendable idea. However, it turns out to be a risky waste of time. The solid and classical move would have been bishop to e7, followed by castle, completing black's development and ensuring a safe game. Note that if knight takes b3 isn't a good idea here, as it doesn't provide a significant advantage of having the two bishops, as the center is congested with pawns. White gains control of the center dark squares with knight takes b3 followed by bishop e3, and black should be careful not to create a hole in his pawn structure by handing over the c5 square to white. So black played g6. Now white played queen e2. Karpov prepares an excellent pawn sacrifice to defeat black's plan. Bishop g7. Now black only needs one move to castle kingside and he will have a good position. Placing the bishop on g7 will then be justified. Now white played knight d4. White offers the e-pawn in order to clear the way for the f-pawn to run at the black king side and split it in half. Now black played knight takes e5. Korchnoi prefers to undergo a kingside attack over declining the offer with knight takes d4. Then c takes d4, knight takes b3, knight takes b3. If he had gone for that, white would have had a clear winning plan, doubling the rooks on the c file, possibly including queen to c2 and targeting the vulnerable pawn on c7. However, a more promising option was queen d7, maintaining a strong presence in the center. So after knight d4, black captured, knight takes e5, and then white played f4. Pawns possess a valuable advantage of being cost-effective and expendable when compared to major pieces. Consequently, when pawns advance towards an opponent's piece, the latter is compelled to retreat. This attribute makes pawns irresistible as attacking weapons. In fact, it could be argued that nearly every successful attacking plan relies on the assistance of pawns at some point. Black played knight c4. The knight chooses a square where it blocks the white bishop on b3. f5. The battering ram finally strikes the black king side, leaving it permanently shattered. G takes f5. Eliminating the charging pawn is the only way to avoid immediate disaster. Knight takes f5. White's attack flows smoothly as the white knight, backed by the queen and rook, forms a powerful substitute for the pawn. Rook g8. Korchnoi acknowledges that the kingside will never provide a secure retreat for his king given the dangers in the center. As a result, he cleverly turns necessity into a virtue by defending the bishop with his rook. Should white's assault lose momentum, Korchnoi might initiate a potent counter-attack along the g file. Knight takes c4. In response, Karpov clears the way to bring reinforcements into the battle with gain of time by exchanging of knights. D takes c4. When faced with a choice of pawn recaptures, conventional thinking suggests that you should retake towards the center, as in this case, b takes c4. However, Korchnoi has a clear strategy in mind. He aims to open the d file, allowing his queen to support the knight on d3 in the following move. Additionally, he envisions the possibility of playing bishop to d5 in the future, which would enable bishop to join a counterattack on g2. So after d takes c4, now white played bishop to c2. The bishop has to retreat but now has a useful role in fighting for the important d3 square. Knight d3. Black's counterplay starts to appear impressive with a well-positioned knight in the center and all other minor pieces actively engaged, including the rook on g8. However, the position's logic work against him as he struggles to bring his queen's rook into the game and his king remains uneasily placed in the center. Karpov speeds up his development with the next move to capitalize on these advantages. So white played bishop to h6. From a strategic standpoint, bishop takes h6, knight takes h6 would be a favorable exchange for white as it swaps a passive bishop for the one that defends the dark squares around the black king. On a tactical level, this exchange would leave black in a difficult position with limited good moves available. In addition to the obvious knight takes g8, the black would also have to contend with knight takes f7, disrupting the cover around the black king. Black played bishop f8. The bishop retreats so that after bishop takes f8, king takes f8, the black king would be out of the firing line of the white queen, freeing the bishop on e6 from the pin. So after bishop a8, white played rook a d1, a systematic move that activates white's last undeveloped piece. Black cannot reciprocate this as the rook on a8 is challenging to activate. Hence, it is unsurprising that white will hold a significant firepower advantage when the tactical battle ensues. So after rook a d1, queen d5. A powerful move by the black queen, seemingly envisioning a checkmate on g2. bishop takes d3. An essential exchange. If white paused for even a move, then long castle follows when suddenly black has an excellent game. His problem on rook on a8 is strongly centralized in support of the wonder knight on d3. So white played bishop takes d3, c takes d3. Black recaptures with reluctance as the opening of the d file implies that his king will remain perpetually separated from the security of the queen side. Rook takes d3. At last, white has regained his pawn and in doing so has maintained all his attacking chances. Queen c6. The queen must retreat as if after rook takes g2 check, queen takes g2, queen takes d3, loses a rook to queen takes a8 check. So after queen c6, white played bishop takes f8. Now the defender of the black's dark square weaknesses on e7, f8, and g7 is eliminated. Queen b6 check. A necessary check as black would lose a piece after king takes f8, knight d4, queen b6 and queen takes e6. This pawn over here is pinned. So after queen b6 check, white played king h1 and then black captured king takes f8. If rook takes f8, then queen f3 attacking the rook, rook d8, knight g7 check, king e7 and queen f6 checkmate. So after king h1, black played king takes f8. Queen f3. After queen f3 attacking the a8 rook and strengthening his attack on the file. Rook e8. All the black pieces are now clustered around their king, but they cannot prevent disaster as the dark squares are riddled with weaknesses. Knight h6 attacking the g8 rook and putting pressure on the f7 pawn. Rook g7 supporting the f7 pawn. If rook g6, then queen takes f7, bishop takes f7, rook takes f7 and it's a checkmate. So rook g7, then white played a brilliant move. The star move, rook d7. If bishop takes d7, then queen takes pawn, rook takes queen, rook takes rook, checkmate. So after rook d7, black played rook to b8, making some space for the king. Then knight takes f7. Bishop takes d7. If bishop takes knight, then rook takes king g8, supporting the g7 rook. And then rook f8 check, takes, and then queen takes, followed by it's a checkmate. So after knight f7, black played bishop takes d7. And then white played knight d8 check. Now wherever black king moves, it is checkmate with queen f8. Let's say if the black king goes to e7, then queen f8 checkmate. If king e8, then also queen f8 checkmate. If king g8, then also queen f8 checkmate. So that was the game. So from this game, we learned few principles. So these principles are: occupy the center with pawns, develop your pieces towards the center, castle as early as possible, move a piece only once during the opening. Do not push too many pawns in the opening. Do not neglect piece development. Seize any files that are open. Control them at once with rooks or queens. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment and share and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Bye-bye.